This presentation is divided into two parts. The first part we're going to cover today, which is going to focus more on the African religious history, where we get to look at the African traditional religion and Christianity. Then the second part, hopefully, which we'll be able to cover next week, will then be looking at Christian development theology. How can Christianity spearhead development of Africa in the 21st century? Why? Because I do appreciate that this whole conversation is happening in the context of leadership development towards a more transformative approach to leadership in Africa. So I would want to close this whole conversation with us looking at how we can position Christianity to spearhead development of Africa in the 21st century. I strongly believe that the 21st century is ours for the taking as Africa. We can position ourselves as the powerhouse, global powerhouse, if we do the necessary reforms, and indeed if as the church we get to take our rightful place within the whole development agenda of Africa. So we'll get to cover that in more detail next week. So today I'm going to lay the foundation of the journey that we have traveled as Africa, of how to get that place where we get to talk about how did we get to where we are. And then next week we'll be looking at how then we can begin to build from where we are so that we get to fulfill the aspirations of every young African right now. There's so much potential, so much hope within the African youths, but that can fail to be realized if I believe we do not address some of the issues that we are going to be discussing next week. So some good news. I think the overspread narrative of Africa is that of a dark continent, all right? Mad with disease, wars, illiteracy. That's the general and the overplayed narrative when it comes to Africa. But we also have our own realities, especially in the 21st century. Some of the fastest growing economies are actually in Africa. And we actually have in many countries and many scientists within African countries actually taking the lead in as far as technological advancements is concerned. Kenya is doing very well, guys. Kenya is doing very well. We have Rwanda, which is also doing well. And we also have open markets. Africa is opening up with the African Continental Free Trade Area. There's so much good that is happening within Africa. There's improved literacy, there's improved health provision, improved education. So there's so much that we need to begin to also make noise about as Africans so that we can begin to counter what I believe is an overplayed narrative of Africa. But this is not to say that there is still no gloom in Africa. You know, this African paradox is still very real. In spite of all the advancement and the progress that we have made, you find that there's still so much room for us to be better as Africa. And the African paradox is still very much real. You find that Africa is arguably the richest continent. We all know that. We have heard about this. And yet Africa is home to some of the poorest economies in the world. It's said to note that about 445 million people, were poor, which constitute about 34%. This was in 2020, just before COVID-19. And this is almost 9 times the average for the rest of the world. And then 30 more million people were plunged into poverty due to the COVID pandemic. And you also find that within Africa itself, most of the poverty is concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. Guys, I need you to take note of this. I need you to take note of this statistic, that most of the poverty is concentrated in the sub-Saharan Africa region. South Central Africa is the highest extreme poverty rate of 54.8%, followed by Southern Africa at 41.1%, and rates in Western and Eastern Africa are 36.8 and 33.8 respectively. What's of particular interest is the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the Democratic Republic of Congo is arguably one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But statistics also portray the Democratic Republic of Congo as being home to 10% of the world's population in extreme poverty. And this does not make sense. How can you get to have the wealthiest country, one of the wealthiest countries in terms of resources, in terms of minerals, contributing 10% of the global poor? It does not make sense. Then North Africa, this is also very key. North Africa has managed to meet the SDG target of a poverty rate of below 3%. This was by 2019. And it's projected that by 2050, in North Africa, the poverty rate might have dropped to about 1.8%. So using the poverty line where a person is said to be living below $1.90 a day, you find that Africa's extreme poverty rate of 43.1% in 1981 was almost equal to the average for the rest of the world, which was at 42.8%. So it would appear that since 1981, Africa seems to be getting poorer whilst the rest of the world progresses. Probably that's why we continue to bear these negative labels in spite of the significant gains that we have made as a continent and as a people. It's sad to note that we are still getting poorer whilst the rest of the world seems to be progressing. Another harsh reality of Africa is the issue of hunger. You find that another paradox there. We are home to a significant portion of the world's arable land, and yet we are unable to feed our own citizens. So of the 10 countries identified by the World Food Programme as having the highest number of people facing critical food insecurity in 2022, 5 of them were in Africa. 5 of them were in Africa, guys. And in sub-Saharan Africa, 45.5 million people in 12 countries, Central and Southern Africa, are likely to starve. There is gross food insecurity in sub-Saharan Africa, and 43.6 million people in 9 countries in East Africa also facing food insecurity. 30.4 million people in 16 countries in West Africa and the Sahel also facing food insecurity. So it's because of these statistics that is the young people, we also then get to be discouraged, we also get to be frustrated about our identity as Africa.